Five-star quarterback Jared Curtis is committing today. Now, when I'm recording this, I don't know if he's picked Georgia or Oregon, so just keep that in mind, but this is going out today. It makes me want to talk about the money because I've read, Matt's told us, money is a factor in this Jared Curtis decision. And look, Oregon's got a lot to throw his way. Georgia's got plenty of money to throw Jared Curtis's way. And this entire process with him and just in general has me thinking, does Georgia need to really dig deep into the pocketbook to win national championships? It's kind of the perception that people have on the Ohio State team from a year ago that, hey, they spent a lot of money on that roster. That's true. They spent a lot of money to keep the players that they already had. And then they went out and they got some high-level players from the transfer portal, which I think really, really mattered, right? We're not talking about run-of-the-mill players. We're talking about Quinton Judkins and Caleb Downs, two of the best college football players of the season a year ago. They went out and they added that to the transfer portal along with a quarterback. Georgia doesn't play the game as much. Now, it's not like Clemson has been, where they're refusing to pay up, refusing to acknowledge the transfer portal as a real tool to make its team better. Georgia's done that, but is Kirby and the Dogs, are they going to have to really pay up to build rosters that are worthy of competing for national championships? I think we're going to see this coming season a little bit into that. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post. If you look at the NIL collectives, look, Georgia's in the top 5 in terms of the power of this money. Texas, Ohio State, LSU, A&M, Michigan, teams up there with them where they have NIL collective funding. Now, when you see those big numbers where it's like Texas, $22 million, Ohio State, $20 million, when you see these big numbers, this is spread throughout the team, right? It's not just one player getting $6 or $7 million, right, in most instances. So Georgia has allocated money towards its roster. I don't know how much Jordan Hall makes, right? Defensive tackle. I don't know how much Oscar Delt makes. It's hard for me to know those things and how much these are divvied up. But for the most part, these players aren't making millions and millions of dollars. Now, you saw what Ohio State did last year and say, hey, look, we're going to pay to keep our guys. I can't pronounce his name. JTT, the defensive end, Jack Sawyer, Travion Henderson, Emeka Buka, right? They already had a lot of talent, but they went into the portal and they paid for Caleb Downs. They paid for Will Howard. They paid for Quinton Judkins. That put their team over the top. It did. This season, you see Kirby, and the reports are Kirby was really nifty with NIL spending, that when he went out and got Branch and Zachariah Branch, Noah Thomas, didn't spend a ton of money. Well, that certainly can be a formula too. And then when you look at recruiting, Georgia's brought in a top 3 class out of high school. So when you look at it those ways, the answer would be no. Georgia doesn't have to spend a ton of money. Kirby doesn't have to spend a ton of money. But if this is the future and it doesn't really change, right? Like I said, I don't know who Jared Curtis picked. But if he picks Oregon and if it's true that the final thing that it came down to was money, look, there are going to be plenty of really, really talented football players that Georgia might miss out on, because that was kind of a theme of what was talked about this spring at Georgia. It was about the types of players that Kirby wants in Athens, the types of players that he's going to go after and recruit to be a part of the Georgia Bulldog football program. He wants like the C.J. Allens of the world, the Stetson Bennett's of the world, the Jordan Davises, guys who it had nothing to do with money. It was about Georgia, and it was about competing, and it was about the type of football player they are. They value that much, much more. So the real question here is, what's the balance? Because if you think Jared Curtis, if you think Jacob Eason, if you think Justin Fields, these types of 5-star prospects, if you think that they can change your program, if you think that they are talented to the point where they're going to be a big reason why you can win national championships, then you do essentially have to assign a dollar figure for what you think that's worth, because money is a part of the game now, and Texas can spend a lot of it. Oregon can spend a lot of it. Georgia can spend a lot of it. LSU, right? These programs have a lot of money to spend in this regard. And we've seen people chase the money, right? And you see, why does Damon Wilson head to Missouri from Georgia? In what world is that situation better for Damon Wilson if it's not financial? And that's me not having the facts necessarily on why he left, but you're about to be the premier edge rusher on a Georgia Bulldogs defense that competes for SEC and national championships on a year in, year out basis. And you go to Missouri? To me, that screams like that was a money decision. Like I said, I don't know the facts there. But that's kind of what you get. So I think it's an interesting conversation in terms of, okay, here's the amount of money we have, which is what? If that, if all that legislation pushes through and Georgia has like a $20 million budget roughly, and they get like $13.5 million to allocate to the football team, they've got to figure out how to allocate that. And then there's the NIL aspect and how do they allocate their money with that. But look, Georgia wasn't going to pay Carson Beck whatever Miami paid Carson Beck. All right, they already divvied up more money to keep him for the 2024 season, more than they are used to with quarterbacks, right? Carson Beck made a good bit of money at Georgia, a couple mil, I believe, at Georgia last season. Now, they weren't going to pay him 4 or 5, and that's what he went down to Miami to get. I think a lot of people would probably argue that Carson Beck's not worth that after what happened this past season. I don't think you really want to pay $4 or $5 million for a quarterback either way, especially one where it's a 1-year rental, which is what Carson Beck is at this point, heading into year 6 of college football. You have to take that into context as well. But is Jared Curtis worth $4 million? At the end of the day, my answer is no. Why is my answer no? How many 4 or 5-star prospects have gotten to college and it just hasn't worked? I mean, Shea Patterson, did that experiment work for Ole Miss? He was number 1, number 2, ranked up there with Jacob Eason. Max Brown, a former 5-star quarterback, didn't win a ton. I'm just trying to think of some random examples because you remember the ones that do work out more than the ones that don't. Haynes King was a former 5-star quarterback, I believe. Right, so you look at that, and sometimes it doesn't work out. Jacob Eason, it didn't really work out, and that's a Georgia example. Justin Fields, he was at Georgia for a year, and then he left. So deciding to pay a high schooler money for a commitment, to me, that doesn't make a ton of sense. Why? Georgia won a 2 national championships. They won an SEC championship. They won Orange Bowl. They won a Peach Bowl with Stetson Bennett. This was a former 2, 3-star, former JUCO guy, all of that. Went to Georgia, left Georgia, came back. They won with that. Team was really good around them. Had 40-plus NFL guys on it. But they won with them, and they figured out a way to do that. So you look at that, and you look at Georgia, and if you're Kirby and you can build a better roster by allocating that money more and by recruiting the types of players that you really, really want, which are the absolute dogs that don't care about that, and you can get a quarterback that's good enough to get the job done and is maybe slept on, maybe that's what they think Gunnar Stockton is, right? But I think that the Stetson Bennett example is kind of proof of the pudding. The answer is no. Now, the game's changed a little bit since Stetson Bennett was around, as NIL has really advanced the last couple of seasons. But I think that Georgia has this in-house example of you don't necessarily have to spend all that money to win. That's my question. I think I kind of answered it. I know that if Curtis didn't commit, people are going to be upset. If he did, they're going to be happy. But know that if he did, it wasn't for free. Thank you for watching.